John Lennon's last meal was reportedly a corned beef sandwich and a hot cup of tea. So today, I'm going to recreate it. John Lennon's last meal was apparently a corned beef sandwich and a hot cup of tea from a prominent deli in New York. From what I can find from online archives, this deli served anywhere between about 5 and 10 sandwiches at any given time that had corned beef in it, and there's no reference to which specific one that John Lennon would have eaten. So I'm just going to default to a classic Reuben, or at least my interpretation of a classic Reuben as someone who's never made a Reuben before and rarely eats them. This is going to go very well. But the deli defined their corned beef sandwich as corned beef, sauerkraut, coleslaw on grilled rye bread with optional Russian dressing. So I'm going to recreate it right now. So to get us started on our curing journey, we need to make a brine. To give us some flavor enhancers, I'm toasting in a pan mustard seeds, coriander seeds, red pepper flakes, peppercorns, cloves, cardamom pods, bay leaves, well, I'm not toasting them, but they're in the mix, and a stick of cinnamon. Once toasted, I'm adding it into a large pot that I filled with 4 litres of water, salt, brown sugar. I did also specially buy some pink curing salt, but it had a health warning on the side and I chickened out, so I didn't do that. You then need to dissolve the sugar in the water by bringing the pot to a boil and then letting it cool completely to infuse. While waiting for the brine to fully cool, I'm removing the worst of the excess fat and sinew from my brisket, as this won't render out during the slow cooking process. And once the brine is fully cooled, submerge the brisket and seal it in an airtight container. Leave it in the fridge for 5 to 7 days, and then you have home cured corned beef. To cook it, I'm removing it from the brine and rinsing the outside of the brisket. I'm then putting it into a slow cooker with a litre of beef stock and putting it on a low temperature for 8 or 9 hours. At which point, it should emerge beautifully tender and ready to be sliced across the grain. Fun fact, corned beef doesn't get its name from a quick annulled marriage to a corn cob. Dad joke time, but anyway. Corned beef gets its name from the big, coarse grains of salt which were used in the curing process. And since the 17th century, this term has become corned beef. Corned beef is often associated with Irish food. However, this association mainly comes from Irish immigrants living in the US. The average person would only really get to eat beef if their cow was sick, dead, or had stopped producing milk. It was mainly reserved for the rich. So beef wasn't even a part of the diet for most of the population. People usually ate pork like Irish bacon instead. But when Irish immigrants arrived in America, they found beef was cheap and plentiful, and they noticed that their Jewish neighbours were eating corned beef which had a similar texture to Irish bacon. This connection made corned beef a popular choice for Irish Americans, ultimately leading to its association with St. Patrick's Day today. So although it's something I've always avoided, most of the dishes that the deli served that featured corned beef also feature Russian dressing. So to be historically accurate, I have to recreate a sauce that tasted like someone mixed a cup of mayonnaise, a cup of ketchup, and left it to go sour. So to make my Russian dressing, I'm adding to a mixing bowl half a white onion, finely chopped, about a cup of mayonnaise, ketchup, horseradish, although I massively underbaked the amount of horseradish you're supposed to put into it, purely because horseradish tastes like a root vegetable that's going through puberty. Hot sauce, Worcestershire sauce, please take note Americans, Worcestershire, sorry for that abuse, sweet paprika, and salt. Mixing all together, and then we have a Russian dressing that I don't know if it's legit or not. Perhaps unsurprisingly, Russian dressing was invented in America. Is it too soon to make a joke about Russian interference in America? Not sure. The sauce was apparently invented in 1924 by an American grocer called James Colburn. He sold it to restaurants, hotels, retailers, and it was so successful he was able to retire early. No one can fully agree why it's called Russian dressing. Some people claim that it originally contained caviar, and there's another theory I read that it was apparently designed to top a Russian-inspired salad. Given the evolution of deli food, I think it's very unlikely that a Manhattan deli in 1980 was still putting caviar in their Russian dressing. So I'll leave that for the 1%. Another element in the deli's Reuben sandwich is coleslaw. So to make the coleslaw, I'm slicing some white cabbage as finely as I can. Then I'm also adding in 1 carrot, which I've julienned just to make sure it's nice and fine, half a red onion, thinly sliced, teaspoon of mustard, some cider vinegar, a little bit of sweet paprika, mayonnaise. So to the 2 smallest pieces of rye bread I think I could ever find. This is not going to be a very generously proportioned sandwich. So to our rye bread, I'm going to add a very respectable layer of Russian dressing. I'm going to layer this up very generously with our corned beef, adding in sauerkraut, a dollop of our coleslaw, a couple of layers of Swiss cheese, which I'm interpreting as Emmental, because Swiss cheese as a catch-all isn't really a thing in the UK. And why not a little more Russian dressing for some top deck lubrication. Put a lid on it. I feel like we need to do a cross section, don't we? I'm getting flashbacks to my Big Mac episode when I realised there's no edifying way of doing this. All right, let's go. That's honestly delicious. It's perfect for me because I deliberately underdid the horseradish. This was the first time I've ever actually tried home curing, and the beef has really picked up with the flavour of all those spices and herbs and everything we put in. It's just delicious. The coleslaw is really nice too. I'm usually more of a fan of like a red cabbage slaw because I think it looks prettier. But this is really tasty. Getting a nice hit of dill from that sauerkraut. There's a lot of flavours here which I wouldn't typically go for, but I'm actually kind of seeing the brighter side of. Although they can seem macabre, I really enjoyed tasting famous last meals because whether or not the person was aware or unaware it was going to be their last meal, it gives you a great insight into what food they enjoyed and what kind of person they were. I read lots of really conflicting stories about Lennon and his eating habits. I don't really even want to summarize the things I read because I don't think it's helpful to potentially spread that misinformation. And there's a lot of speculation out there. I even read a press release from someone who had gone through and tried to work out what the Beatles' favourite foods were, judging by the amount of times they referenced foods in their songs. Apparently honey was their favourite food because they said honey in most of their songs. There's science for you. When I was curing this beef, I basically spent the whole afternoon just listening to the Beatles in the background, and it made me really happy. And the idea that this sandwich made him happy, gotta love it. I have no idea if this was regular fare for him, if it was a treat meal, but even though he was unaware it was going to be his last meal, he picked a pretty great choice, I have to tell you. I'm now going to demolish this whole thing off camera. Bye bye.